welcome everybody to a very, very special episode because we have Simon Curwen with us. And to be honest, we're kind of awestruck. I've been thinking about this all day, so I'm a bit nervous. But Simon, we're massive fans. Simon, as we know, finished first in he was the first to finish, but he finished in Chichester class, but the Golden Globe race. And Simon is an incredible sailor, and it's just such an honor to have you on board, Simon. And we just want to acknowledge as well that Michael Goog, Captain Goog, just came in, and I know you were there to see him. Captain Goog came in third place overall in the Golden Globe race, so congratulations to Captain Goog for coming home. So yeah, Simon, where are you now? I suppose is where we should ask first.
Well, I'm in my house in Brittany, which is about 3 hours from dOlonne. So this is where I prepared the boat and things from here as a base. And it means I can get down to all the arrivals. So it's great to get down to see Michael in or Mikael in just during the week.
Fantastic.
And I'll be down for Jeremy when he's in I guess about a week's time.
Brilliant. And I know you're obviously from the UK originally, and your boat Clara is from your own hometown, built there in the 70s. Would you mind just talking about, were your parents or your grandparents into sailing, Simon, or where did the boat start? Yeah.
Oh, you've been doing your research about where the boat came from and where I live in the UK. In Emsworth. So, I mean, my sailing, the bug started, my parents were sailors. My father had a Firefly when he was up at university in Bangor up on the Menai Straits. It's not the easiest place to sail. And my mother's a sailor as well. She took a little clinker-built dinghy that my grandparents had. I'm not sure that they were great sailors themselves, but they facilitated sailing with the house down on the Isle of Wight, which was where I started sailing. In little clinker boats built locally, but some of them are very competitively sailed down there.
That's amazing. So you got the bug from both of your parents, so it was pretty early.
Yes, it was through them, and then I did sailing at school as well, and then that was obviously much more independent because it was really me doing it, and that was up in Scotland, which was a bit cold at times, but a great introduction to sailing.
Fantastic. I know you've achieved some amazing things in racing over the years, including the Fastnet race, which we're going to get to later. But I might just hand over to Sean, and we might get straight into some of the nitty gritty about the Golden Globe race, because I know our fans are going to be chomping at the bit for us to ask you all the questions that we've been dying to ask you, Simon. So I'll just hand over to Sean just to get going on the Golden Globe questions, I think.
Sure, yeah, and we have a lot of questions, Simon, so we may not get through them all, but we'll do our best. So look, you spent almost 8 months alone at sea. What did it feel like when you arrived back to Les Sables dOlonne? Was it joy? Was it elation? Was it a relief? Can you maybe just take us through how you felt when you initially arrived?
Well, there's a bit of all of those. You're building up to it over the whole race, really, particularly from the equator up, that you're building up to arrival back and land. So it's not quite as much as a shock as it might seem, because you're building your expectations as to what will be there and looking forward to seeing the family and everything else. So then I guess the next bit of elation is, of course, didn't know where we were. I knew it was close because I'd made contact with a cruise ship around by the equator, and much to my surprise, I found out that we were all in a long line at about 4 degrees north, and so I'd made up all the distance that I'd lost in doing my and caught up with Kirsten and Abhilash, who were, I think, 10 days and 7 days respectively ahead of me at the Horn. So I knew it was going to be relatively close, but I had no idea, firstly, that I was in the lead, or that Kirsten was so close on my tail. So that was elation at finding out. Although I'm not in the race, of course, but I still was quite keen to get across the line first. And then, I mean, the whole finish was fantastic for me. I think just about everyone else since has had much less good weather. So when I crossed the line, it wasn't a very sunny day, but at least there was wind from a good direction. And by sailing up the coast a little bit, I could come in under spinnaker to the finish and even hold that down the channel, which I enjoyed a lot.
I actually had a question for that, because you were fined for that. Am I right in saying for flying the spinnaker in the channel? Well,
normally one would be, but there are exceptions to that. And since I had the mare alongside me, I felt fairly safe on that. And Jean-Luc was just behind in a rib, and Yannick Morer, the mare, was there, and he had a smile on his face. So I thought I was fairly safe. Yeah, the fine bit was a bit of a joke between Don and myself.
Yeah, we gathered that. It was good publicity as well for your sponsor, because you got to fly the logo.
There was that. They needed a bit of a return on it, yeah, because they've been very supportive. A real supporting partner. And when I had the problem, which we'll come on to no doubt with the Hydra vein before Cape Horn. They just took on all the responsibility for getting my support crew out there and the Hydra part out there, which was fantastic.
Brilliant. Yeah, like we actually, a couple of weeks before you managed to get level with Kirsten and Abhilash, we did actually make a prediction on the podcast here that you would be first into Les Sables dOlonne. So there was a bold prediction at the time, and there were some people questioning about. We felt that it was definitely a possibility. You were really screaming up the Atlantic after them, and yeah, like I remember as well when you were coming into that anchorage in Chile, myself and Shane did some calls on that, and we did a little piece on one of the episodes where we were trying to analyze where you were going to anchor exactly based on your calls with Don. It's brilliant. It's really great for us to get an insight on the sound clouds with Don, and to try and understand what's going on in your head in that particular moment. Was that when I went into Guateca after having left Portamont? Yeah, exactly. When you came back.
Yeah, I'd set off and there was bad weather, but more to the point, I mean, it was pretty rough weather, but it wasn't that bad. But what I picked up was a forecast that it was just going to be contrary winds and getting worse. And so rather than, particularly as I wasn't in the race anymore per se, I thought it was better just to tuck back in, and I'd probably lose a couple of days. I was in there for about 3.5, 4 days, something like that. But I probably didn't lose anywhere near that amount of time, and I saved the boat a bit and myself.
Yeah, but I think that's what makes your comeback up the Atlantic even more of an achievement. The fact that you had so much ground to make up. But yeah, look, it's an incredible story, and yeah, look, we've been following it so closely, and it's been brilliant for us. So you're back on land a couple of weeks. You've had a chance to reflect on the race. How do you feel now? Are you happy to take a break from being on the boat? Are you itchy to get back out, or have you been back out?
Well, I went out one time just to there's a boat that just came in. It's Tituan's boat, the first Vendée Globe winner, the Écurie d'Aquitaine, came into Les Sables dOlonne. I think it's going to be a bit of a museum piece. The boat looks a bit of a wreck at the moment, but I took Clara out to see that boat coming in, which was really nice. So it was again the Sables dOlonne welcome, in this case for a boat, and Tituan Amazon was on board as well.
Wow. Okay, brilliant. So you've been out again, and do you plan to sail regularly at the moment? I know you're running your own business as well, which we will get to because we want to make sure that everybody's aware of the link and the website, etc. But, you know, are you happy to sort of finish up and park the sailing for a while, or do you feel like you'd like to go out and do a bit of cruising? Like, where's your head at the moment?
Well, I'm sure we'll go out. I mean, there's a bit of a debate as to what's happening to the boat. We have actually decided to put it up for sale because the boat deserves to go around again. It's in good condition, and when I say it deserves to go around again, it's fully equipped for that. Whereas it's short of a few mod cons for cruising and got an awful lot of kit that it really doesn't need. So it is a logical decision to let her go with a bit of sadness, because I think a lot of GGR sailors can't wait to get off their boat and leave it for good, because they're not the easiest or most comfortable boats to sail. But I'm still very attached to Clara. But it's logical she should go. So to come back to your question, I will do some cruising this summer as long as I've got a boat still, and I'll look forward to that. But I'm not itching to go out there. I mean, I'm very much a sailor, an amateur sailor who does sailing for pleasure and racing a bit. And so when the time is right and things, I'll be out there. But I'm not someone who absolutely has to be at sea. I live in a wonderful part of France here, and there's quite a lot of grass to cut and some maintenance to do and all sorts of things to catch up. And I'm quite happy doing that.
I don't think we can allow you to call yourself an amateur sailor in our podcast. It's just not allowed, I'm afraid.
Well, in the pure definition, I think I am, because I made a very conscious choice when I was young to keep sailing at an amateur level and work to earn money to sail rather than try and make a job of sailing. And I don't really have any regrets on that, because there is a danger, I think. I mean, you get some people who succeed in making a life out of the sailing and enjoy it. There are some people who succeed and perhaps don't enjoy their sailing as much as they might because it becomes a job. And then there are probably the majority who don't succeed in making it professionally. So I'm very happy to remain as an amateur sailor, do it as well as I can, but I do it for the love of it rather than as a job.
Okay, fair point.
Yeah, like that's actually a brilliant observation, Simon, because I do know some people who went into it for a living and they lost their passion for it. And my own journey as well, myself, I very much feel it's a passion thing. And I think for that reason, I have been hesitant to go into it to earn a living. So it's interesting to get your insight on that as well. Okay, so we want to talk a little bit about the race and some boat specific stuff. My understanding that was that Clara originally had a wheel and that you replaced that with the tiller. Maybe there was originally a tiller way back, I'm not sure. But could you maybe just take us through the thought process behind that and why you made some adjustments?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a simple job to do, but she was always wheel from start. I think all the Biscays have been wheel steering. I was a bit nervous initially to see what the alignment of the rudder stock would be and where it would come in and whether it would be possible to put the tiller in. So it does actually come up just behind the lazarette, the stern locker, and inside the coaming in perfect alignment. So my guess is that the designer, Alan Hill, in the design of it, designed it such that it could be steered. Not as emergency tiller, because the emergency tiller you steer through the stern locker. You open up the locker and steer that way. But it was obviously designed as an option because otherwise the alignment wouldn't have been that perfect. Why did I do it? I mean, there are a number of reasons. Firstly, it makes a much nicer cockpit until I filled it full of solar panels. I mean, it's a nice spacious cockpit, and I'm not a fan of wheel steering. I would... I mean, to be sort of stuck behind a wheel in the Southern Ocean holds no appeal at all to me. Having said that, once I'd got the Hydra vane on, and because the backstay is a split backstay, it means that you can run a tiller off the Hydra vane rudder itself, straight off the shaft. And so I put a lightweight stainless steel tube tiller that I had knocked up, and then a lightweight tiller extension on that. and that meant that I could steer sort of finger steering rather than two hands on the bar and getting pulled all over the place with the rudder that's attached to the keel. It makes a massive difference having that rudder blade on the back of the boat. And that meant that during light airs and spinnaker work, particularly the asymmetric, where you've got a lot of apparent wind effects coming into play, you can't expect the Hydra end to understand apparent wind. So in the relatively limited amount of spinnaker work that I did, I was quite often steering.
Brilliant. So you were actually able to steer, you were steering directly off the Hydra rudder at times as well in the light airs.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I did most of the steering that I did do was on the Hydra rudder.
And did you steer for enjoyment in those places, or was it for performance?
Oh, it's a bit of both. So, I mean, if you've got the spinnaker up, then it's fun and it's faster to steer by hand. As I was talking about the apparent wind issue, the Hydra end can't be expected to understand that at all. So it would continually be luffing up and then collapsing the spinnaker, and it really was painful and slow. So just about all the time under spinnaker, I would be steering. But yeah, it's a pleasure. That's what I've enjoyed
as well. Okay, cool. In your tour with Don, your post-race tour, and if anybody hasn't seen that, we would advise people to go back and watch that. It's a brilliant interview and a brilliant tour of Simon's boat, and we were glued to that when it was released. I think you mentioned that you didn't see a boat, or saw very few boats, all the way from Cape Town to Hobart, which is approximately 7 weeks. So you went that distance without seeing any human life. I mean, what was that like? Was it, did you ever get lonely?
No, not really lonely. There were a few times when I got bored, which I wasn't expecting. And those were more in the Pacific than the Indian. And that would happen when effectively we were locked down below in the cabin for a week or so. And when I say locked down, clearly I wasn't locked down, and I wasn't down there to hide really from the elements. But these boats with their pinched in sterns, they're very unstable downwind, unstable, they're rolling. And they're pitching, and you've got the waves coming from a series of different directions. So you can never predict where the waves are coming from. And sitting in the cockpit, where you're relatively high up, sort of 1.5 meters above the cabin sole, you get thrown around a lot more, and there are a lot of sharp edges. It's just not a very comfortable place to be. So combine that with the fact that sailing downwind with no spinnaker up, and a lot of the time with no headsail up, even just with the mainsail, there's not much one can do on performance. I was saying that I was taking over from the Hydra with spinnaker and things because that made a bit of a difference on the performance. If it wasn't with the spinnaker, to be honest, the Hydra steers a good course and a lot of the time a better course than I do. So under those circumstances, then the best place to be is as low down in the boat as possible. Which might mean lying on the bunk, but there's a limit to how long you can sleep. So the rest of the time, if I haven't got a good book to read, then it's a bit tedious, to be honest. I didn't think that would be the case, but certainly was. But lonely, not really. I'm a fairly solitary creature, unfortunately. So loneliness wasn't a real issue, and there weren't any humans there, but there were an awful lot of birds. I mean, that's a nature of the Southern Ocean, is that always birds around, and sometimes a couple of hundred at a time. Petrels, in particular, a lot of albatross, mollymonks, all sorts of birds, and they're there. And sometimes the same ones would be sticking with you for days or weeks at a time. Very, very different from the Atlantic, where you get birds around landform, but other times there are no birds at all. So no, not lonely. But it was the case certainly between Cape Town and Hobart. I saw absolutely no boats. There was one fishing boat off the Agulhas Bank, and that was it. And it was pretty much the same between New Zealand and in my case Chile. Again, not single boat.
Wow, it's incredible.
Yeah, the world is a big place. The ocean's a big place, and it's. I'm pleased to say it's not as polluted as one gets the impression. And yeah, it's a great place to be. But yeah,
it's interesting you mentioned birds because and you probably haven't seen this, but during the Tapio rescue, when Tapio was floating around in the life raft, he was sending messages back to race control via the YB3 saying, you know, I'm here with these. He was watching these birds. I mean, the positivity from the man was just it was something else, and it was so brilliant for us to watch. And
I did hear about that.
It was really incredible, that whole sequence, and of course with Ian as well. I mean, you know, so many things have happened on this race. It really is an unbelievable journey, and I think we've discussed many times in the podcast, for anyone that does return to Les Sables dOlonne with the boat, it's an incredible achievement.
Yeah. It is quite extraordinary just how much happens. I mean, you're always going to get something happening in the GGR, and that's kind of why we do it, because it's a bit of an adventure. But yeah, I'm amazed at how few boats finished. I thought there'd be more finishing. For one reason or another. And Tapio's incident was extraordinary, and I've seen his technical evaluation of how that happened. And I still find it really difficult to believe, but I have no other explanation. I mean, it's really incredible.
We both watched that as well, the 2.5 hour long piece with the architect. It's fascinating, and it was. But I mean, it's still, you know, as you said, it's an unbelievable situation, really, and a fantastic outcome, obviously. And fingers crossed that Guy and Jeremy make it back safe and sound. Okay, we'll maybe just jump back a little bit to the race. So one thing that I picked up on that I found very interesting was that you mentioned that light weather was actually the more stressful than the heavy weather. Can you maybe just explain why that was?
Yeah, I mean, there's just no peace in light weather. I mean, literally, because the sails are flogging. You can either take them down completely and then you haven't really got much of a hint when wind is coming, or you can leave them up. And in my case, I've got fully battened sail with cars in the mast. And when those slam backwards and forwards in the waves, it's painfully noisy and shakes the whole boat. So that's not very pleasant. When you're racing, there's the stress about how have you got into this hole? Is everybody else in the same hole? Are they going to creep up and find some wind and sail around you? You're wondering how you're going to get out. Is the course that you're sailing right? Should be looking at the barometer, seeing if there's any hints there. There's just no peace at all. And then anytime there's a breath of wind, you stick up a spinnaker, and then 5 minutes later, that's got to come down. So you then got to pack that spinnaker. Then you put up a light weather Genoa, then that comes down. It's just, there's no rest at all.
That's why the doldrums are so frustrating for everybody. So
yes, I mean, the doldrums somehow, for me, were less bad. I had 2 good passages of the doldrums, I have to say. I was quite fortunate in both of them. So the worst of the light weather was certainly down off Australia, where I sat for 4 or 5 days guessing that everyone was catching up and removing the leak that I'd built. And then actually sailing down through the Atlantic, the trade winds north of the equator were absolutely non-existent. And it was very light weather down there. And that was very frustrating. The doldrums, you expect and you build up to it. And there are calms, but then you know that under the clouds, and if you can just get to those clouds, you're going to get something. You're not quite sure what it's going to be, but you're going to get some wind. And somehow there's always something that you can be doing to try and work through them.
Brilliant. Yeah, like we remember that so well when you were coming into, I think it was approaching Hobart, when you got stuck in the hole and Kirsten made up hundreds of miles. Of course, it's so easy for us, and we have to keep reminding ourselves, and myself and Shane were talking about this throughout the race. Like, you guys don't have windy. We're looking at windy, and we know, okay, in 2 days, Simon, relax, the wind is going to come, you're going to be fine. But you don't know that. It must feel like forever in your situation.
It absolutely does. And I mean, that was a frustrating time for all sorts of reasons. Firstly, I really wasn't expecting it. You're down in the roaring 40s, and there hadn't been any decent weather systems coming through for a while. I hadn't at that stage got any forecasts. We had been promised some forecasts, some weather bulletins, and I'd been asking GGR for organisation for them. And they'd managed to send the link and the schedule out to everybody except for me. And I was the first one there, and I'd been asking for it, but somebody had forgotten to send it to me, or it had not got through. So I was getting a bit frustrated with that as well, and thinking everyone got it in for me, which is the sort of thing that happens when you're sailing on your own and in light airs. It's the mental part of it, which generally speaking, I think I managed pretty well. But that was a weak point for me. So there's that. And I mean, I knew I was sitting on the back of a high pressure just because of the wind direction I was getting, but there was nothing I could do about it because the center of the high pressure was south of me, which would have been the way I'd have wanted to go. I wouldn't have wanted to go any further north because that was taking me further towards the mainland. So I thought I was in the place that I wanted to be, but as you say, I just had to be patient and wait. But easier said than done.
Yeah, cool. Speaking of the mental game, one thing that I found very interesting again in your boat tour was the discipline around clothing, like wet gear, keeping a dry area of the boat, and taking off your wet clothes before you stepped into the saloon where your bunk was. Can you maybe just explain to people who wouldn't be familiar with offshore sailing why it's so important to keep your gear dry, to keep your bunk dry, to keep the equipment dry?
Yeah, I was quite interested in, I'm sure you've watched the Abilash's post-race interview, and he was talking about he slept on the floor and he had water coming through in all sorts of places. I mean, I just couldn't stand that. He's a tougher man than I am. So, I mean, the issues are that, I mean, you've got a limited amount of dry clothing, and you've got limited amount of bedding and mattresses and things. And if you're out there for 230 odd days, once it's got wet, salty wet, then it's damp or salty wet for the rest of the race. So if you want to keep things dry, then you need discipline. I'm not always the best person on discipline, but for that I was. So all the oilies got taken off immediately, come down the companionway, hung up to drip, and I got a drain through to the floor, which was there originally, and that just went through to the bilges. And then once I'd stripped all that off and got the wellies off and taken off the wet hat and the gloves and everything and toweled myself down a bit, then I was allowed a meter further into the boat and into the dry area. And that really worked. I ended up coming back with a mattress that was pretty dry. The only time it got wet was when it ended up on the floor and when it got knocked down or partially knocked down. With me on top of it, and sleeping bags. Yeah, they got damp. I had a lightweight cotton one for the tropics because synthetic materials aren't great there, and then a heavier duty one which can actually cope with getting a little bit damp for the south, and those pretty much stayed okay for the duration. The bonus of the Chile stop was that Claire, my wife, was over there, and she very kindly offered or was asked to do a bit of washing and drying, so I did manage to get a few bits sorted over there. But I'd have been fine for the trip with the clothing I'd got, just by that sort of level of discipline.
And I know you mentioned merino wool, and you mentioned you had waterproof socks as well. What kind of footwear did you use? Did you go barefoot at any stage, or I saw you had Crocs on when you were doing the boat tour. Did you go with the Crocs, or did you go with like Dubarry's or something like that?
I had all of those. So I was barefoot a lot. Pretty much have to be in the tropics because it's just so hot. Then the Crocs. Now I'm not sure which Crocs I was wearing. Whether they're sort of proper Crocs with nothing on at all. There's an offshore version of the Crocs which are better ventilated and a bit more waterproof and have got a bit of grip to them. And I wore those an awful lot of the time. But they were just Crocs. And then as soon as you get down into the heavier weather in the Southern Ocean, I had just had a pair of rubber wellies, Helly Hansen bog standard rubber wellies, which are quick to get into. And I was amazed that I actually managed to keep those dry for the duration of the race, which really surprised me. I mean, they were my wet weather ones that I could just wring out and they would get moderately dry. I could wear the waterproof socks. And then I had, I don't know if you're familiar with Lizard boots. They're my equivalent of a Dubarry, but they're Italian made, and they're very lightweight and strong and got a pretty good grip. So that was my Dubarry equivalent.
Brilliant. Amazing that you kept the boots dry.
Yeah, I was really surprised.
And just maybe to touch on heavy weather, had you experienced heavy weather before? Like, we know you had the knockdown. We get to that point about the Hydra vein, but had you much heavy weather experience before? And what was your strategy going into the race? And did you tweak that as the race went on and you experienced it?
Yeah. So in terms of heavy weather, I mean, I've sailed in heavy weather in the Atlantic and the Irish Sea and the Channel approaches and places like that. But the only heavy weather I'd done really with Clara before was during my qualifier. I ran into a storm, Storm Alex, I think it was. So that would have been back in 2020, I think, well before the start of the race. It was before the refit, so it was all with all the old equipment. And I had a bit of practice in that. I was trying to get around Finisterre at the time, and that wasn't going to happen because it was a southwesterly. So I just ran before it and went all the way down to Gijón in northern Spain and tucked in there in cover. So I'd experienced that, and she'd behaved really well in following seas there. So then the next experience really was of that sort of Southern Ocean type weather was in the race itself, and entering the Indian Ocean, leaving Cape Town, was straight into gales. So I had a series of about 6 gales in about 10 days. None of them particularly extreme, all sort of up in the sort of 40, 45 knots, that sort of range. So that was quite a good initiation. And I didn't really have any particular storm tactics other than keeping the stern to the wind and waves on the quarter. Of course, in the Southern Ocean, where you've got wind coming from, typically systems coming with wind from the northwest and then going around to the west and then going to the southwest. And then you've got 3 different wave formations. That then becomes a bit tricky to manage, to work out which is the best angle to get the waves coming on the transom. In terms of what I planned for, my plan was to keep the boat moving through the storms and try not to use drogues or warps if that was at all possible. And in fact, I didn't ever use drogues or warps in that context. I did use a drogue trying to steer after I'd lost the Hydra vein, just as an experiment to see if I could use it to get the boat to stay a bit more downwind. But that was the only time I actually took it out in earnest. Just reducing sail and keeping the boat sailing down waves and downwind and the waves on the quarter. Those were really the storm tactics.
Yeah, brilliant. That's really insightful. And we've been collecting this knowledge from everyone that we've been speaking to, because I'm absolutely fascinated by the different techniques. And of course, Sir Robin has had an article on heavy weather as well. It's really interesting to see what the different, of course, it's boat specific as well, and it's circumstance specific, and it's skipper specific, I'm sure. But I find it really fascinating, and it's an area I guess there's very little information about this area, because not many people spend so much time on their own in these conditions where you need to go through storm after storm.
No, and it's very difficult to compare because, as you say, boats are different, but every storm is different, every gale is different. So unless you're really going to go out there and put yourself in a storm and then change your systems all the way through, I mean, which of course some people do because they try something and then that doesn't work, so they try something else.
Yeah.
But as you say, I think people have got their favorites. I think there is a trend which was probably started by Mortessier, which was to let the boat go a bit more.
Yeah.
And probably is more of a modern way of thinking about things. But that doesn't mean that drogues are not appropriate in a lot of conditions.
And did you run with bare poles, like without any sails at any point in time?
I did. I think the only time I did was in the event where I lost the Hydra vein and got at least partially knocked down.
You got knocked down, yeah.
Do you think it had any impact on the knockdown, or do you think did you just take down all the sails because the wind was just so high?
It was forecast to be a severe gale. The wind was building. It was certainly the strongest winds that I had experienced down in the Southern Ocean. It wasn't as high as, for example, Ian had experienced. I mean, it was only sort of 40, 45 knots, which is not particularly extreme down there. And it wasn't forecast for the waves to be particularly vicious either. So I did it as a precaution, and I don't think it probably had any bearing. Maybe I was, if I'd been going a little bit faster, if I'd just been sailing under 3 reefs, maybe I'd have got away with it. Certainly, I probably wouldn't have been got by that particular wave because I'd have been in a different place. But would there have been another one? You just
exactly.
I mean, who can tell?
Yeah. Cool, brilliant. Look, Shane, you're itching to get in here. I want to ask just 2 very quick questions to Simon. One is technical, but the first one I just want to ask Simon is kind of, it's a more general reflection that I think we've both, myself and Shane, have noticed about the race, is the camaraderie between the skippers, particularly after the race. It's very obvious. Like, I know you've been to the UK, but you were anxious to get back to meet Gug, Captain Gug coming in. Could you maybe just tell us a little bit about what's the bond like for those of you that have completed this journey?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I wanted to do a race like the GGR, because I'd already experienced the same sort of bond and atmosphere in when I did Mini Transat back in 2001. And that's something very special. It's a bond between the participants. It should be with the organisers as well. And in the case of Sub dOlonne, actually with the public, so and with the supporters, partners in it as well. It is an amazing bond. There are some skippers I've got more of a bond with, and that's because I'd met them before. With COVID and everything, a lot of the skippers weren't able to come to the earlier meetings that we had, and some people again couldn't make it to the start until just before the start. So those I knew a little bit less. But Mikel had been around a fair time in Sub dOlonne and the Loire, and he'd been up to Lorient where I kept the boat as well. So I know him a bit better than some of the others. Where I missed out, and I made a big mistake, and you'll have heard it reported, and I won't go into too much detail, is that in my installation, I did a pretty good preparation and planning and preparation for the event. But the one thing that I left to the last minute, partly because I don't like it, and it also doesn't affect the speed of the boat, was my radio installation. And I was unable to transmit because I'd put in an inadequate counterpoise, which is effectively the earth for transmission. And that meant that I wasn't able to have conversations with the skippers going around. So a lot of them had in-depth conversations, very regular conversations, and that built the bond a little bit more. Mine was a bit of a one-sided bond because I could hear them, but I couldn't communicate with them. I felt like a little bit of a spy because sometimes they were giving information on where they were or what conditions they were in, and I wasn't giving any feedback myself.
It must have been so difficult. Like we spoke about your radio problem a lot, myself and Sean. Like, it must have been really hard for you listening to everybody and not being able to talk back. But you kept your cool about it. Like, you didn't complain too much to Don.
Well, there's only one person's fault in that, and it's mine. So I couldn't really complain to anybody else. Yeah, I mean, there was much more conversation than I was expecting. I wasn't expecting there to be anywhere near, or the radio quality to be anywhere near what it was. So, I mean, I was expecting to be relatively solitary. But yeah, as you say, it was a bit frustrating not to be able to hear, to join in the conversations. particularly when they were saying things and I could contribute usefully to them.
I've actually got like a million questions here that I'm not going to get to, Simon. So I'll skip ahead to the Hydra vein issue. But I didn't actually have the radio on the list because we've all been very much aware of that issue. Those of us that have been following the race closely, it was obvious to us that you weren't going to be able to transmit, but that you were hearing things. So I actually didn't even think about it when I was putting together the questions for this. But I just want to, Shane, I'll let you in then afterwards. But the Hydra vein issue, can you maybe just explain what happened? We know there was a knockdown, and the actual, I've seen pictures of the piece and I've seen the video description of you talking about it, but maybe for the people that haven't seen it, can you explain what happened with your self-steering system essentially?
Yeah, unfortunately I haven't got the bits here because that really helps explain it, but I mean, the Hydra vane's made up of several components. You've got the rudder beneath, you've got the vane on top, and in between, you've got the components that translate the movement of the vane into the movement of the rudder. And the body of that comes in two parts. There's a bit lower down, and the head of it is the bit that really it supports the vane, and it's got the heavy lead counterbalances on it that counterbalance the vane. And it translates the vane movements into a vertical movement that then goes down into the lower part of the body. And the bit that failed was the head casting. So it's cast aluminium. And apparently, I haven't spoken to Hydra Vane yet. I keep saying this, and I really must talk to them. But there always seems to be lots of other things to do, and it's no longer that urgent. But Hydra Vane say that I'm the only person that's ever broken on in normal circumstances. Two others have broken, but in marina incidents. Now, I haven't heard that firsthand from Hydra Vane, so take that as third-party gossip, maybe. But that's what I understand. So this is not a component that is expected to fail, and therefore it's not a part that I carried as spare. I did carry all sorts of other parts, including the vane and all sorts of things. So what it meant, I mean, how did it happen first? How it will have happened is I got hit by a mass of water. So this was coming in over my port quarter, the back of the boat, and it landed on top of the vane. And with several tons of water landing on top of a flat surface, something was going to give. It would have been nice if it had been the vane or something else that I've got spares of, but it was the casting that went. The same wave knocked out my Watton-Sea hydro generator, bent the whole shaft across, so that was unusable because it was now bent, and if I put it down, it was rubbing against the Hydra vane rudder. It also swept across the boat at about 2 meters height, at least 2 meters height. I don't know what height, and sort of ripped the main out of the mast track, and ripped off rope bags off the boom, and
your it ripped off your teak handrails as well.
My
teak handrails.
Yeah. Well, that happened. It was just one of the rails that went. So the reason that happened is in the Southern Ocean, I'd had my French called canopy, but the spray hood across the companionway. I had that folded down so that it didn't catch in the wind and drag the stern round and take the boat broadside onto the waves. And I had it strapped down to handrails. And the weight of the water coming through inflated it, although it was collapsed, split the seams of it, ripped the whole frames and their mountings off the coach roof, and also took out, as you say, the handrail that it was all strapped down to. Okay. And so there was just one handrail left with the whole lot just hanging over the side of the boat when I came to recover it. So that was more stuff that had to be mended in Chile in the short period we were there.
Did you get? I know you mentioned you were going to get a metal expert to look at the actual casting. Did you get a chance to? No, not yet.
It hasn't happened. I'm not sure whether I will do that or let Hydra Vane have a look at that. I mean, Hydra Vane were supportive at the time and immediately sent complete new head unit rather than just sending the spare part to make life at least a little bit easier in doing the replacement.
And when it happened, Simon, like how soon after? I mean, obviously it's a shock when you get hit by a wave. You must have known something big was up. Like, what was that initial feeling like, and how long was it from that moment to you realizing, hang on a second, I'm gonna have to stop?
Okay. I mean, firstly, when it happened, my memory is blank, so I don't remember. I was essentially knocked down in both directions. Initially to starboard because the wave coming from port, and then bounced back and knocked down, and that's when I got thrown out because I was sleeping on the leeward bunk. But collected bits of navigation equipment from both sides of the boat high up, so I'd got a fair way over. Quite how far, I don't know. I mean, my gut feeling is the mast didn't go in the water, but then the Windex on the top of the mast was broken. That's usually a sign that it has gone in the water. So I'll never know. One of those mysteries. So my first recollection was me on the floor in a bit of water, not huge amounts of water, and a whole load of carnage. Not as much as I would have expected if I had been fully knocked down. So I cleared up some of that, got into my foul weather gear, got up, saw that the Hydra vane was destroyed, and some of the rest of the damage. Obviously, a bit upset about it and thinking so just started tidying it up. Then once I'd got going again, got the boat safe, I started thinking about, well, what were the options? And I spent the next 2 days. I actually just listened to your podcast with Pat. And that was just after I think I'd got knocked down, and in fact it must have been immediately after, because I think Pat was of the opinion that I'd be able to carry on, and I think perhaps you were as well, because initially I had wind which I think was from the southwest, which meant that that was a direction I could make a course for the Cape. So it would have been southwest in the aftermath of that weather system. And so for 24 hours, I was making 6.5 knots towards Cape Horn, and all was looking reasonable. I was thinking, well, if Robin Knox-Johnson managed to sail from Australia to the finish without any wind vane of any sort, crumbs, I ought to be able to do half that distance or less than half that distance. But unfortunately, the nature of these boats, the Rustler's the same. I don't know about, for example, Pat's boat Saga, whether he could make that, but I think he in that podcast he was intimating he'd struggled downwind as well.
He did.
So I tried for a couple of days, as I mentioned earlier, doing everything from hoisting sails on in the sort of sheet to tiller methods, and hoisting storm jib out to windward, just to try and get some sort of balance on the sails that would keep it sailing a course downwind, so that I could sleep and have some rest, because I still had about 8-9 days at full speed before getting to the Horn. And at the end of the 2 days, I had to accept that it wasn't going to be safe to continue. I knew I'd got another weather system coming up about 6 days behind that was probably worse than the one I'd just been through. And so I considered it reckless for me, the boat, and anybody who had to come and rescue me to carry on, and decided at that stage to seek shelter. Then that meant once I'd committed and posted to GGR that I was going into Chichester class, then they were allowed to help me with suggestions on ports, because of course we're not carrying adequate charts for making a landing on that rugged Chilean coast. So all sorts of support and advice was coming, and actually very, very nicely, a number of Chileans were in touch with my team through Facebook, and then in touch with GGR. We put them in, or the team put them in touch with GGR, because Seb at GGR is fluent Spanish speaker, which is particularly helpful in trying to organize. But we had people who were going to help with the administration and helping out technically, which was absolutely fantastic. These are just people following the race who just said, please come to Portomont, and we can help.
That's amazing.
Which is amazing, absolutely amazing.
It is.
Yeah, and I'm sure you've probably seen all the stuff with and you've probably heard him yourself during the race. Passage Guardian, he did an amazing job of helping people out.
Yes, unfortunately, I missed out on most of that because those were the weather bulletins that I was hoping to get off Australia, and things had changed in the meantime. He used to just do broadcasts of weather for people, but I think he found himself speaking to the ether an awful lot and with no feedback at all. So at some point between when he volunteered his services to us getting down there, he'd switched to a mode where he would respond to people's requests. And since I couldn't radio in, I couldn't get the weather. Now I managed to relay a message back to my team through GGR to see if he wouldn't just help me out a little bit. And he did broadcast at the same time as he was broadcasting really for Michael Gug on his Biscay, because we ended up approaching the Horn at a fairly similar time. And so down the Chilean coast, where I was particularly exposed because I'm on a lee shore there, he did broadcast weather, which I could use, which was really useful.
Great.
Someone actually has a video of you rounding the Horn. I don't know if you've seen it, Simon, but it's awesome.
I have, and I've actually got he took some pictures as well. I've got a photo which Claire has very kindly produced and blown up and mounted. Awesome. I had a really good conversation. I think the conversation is recorded in GGR. I've got it because they have to. The lighthouse keeper has to try and make contact with all boats and ships going round and report that to the Chilean Navy. So it started off as a technical, bureaucratic conversation and ended up as a great sort of conversation, finding out about his family and the contract he's on down there. And he very kindly invited me to go down and stay with him at some stage. But his contract ends in December, so I'll have to get a move on.
Amazing. Must have been a great feeling. Shane, I'm going to let you jump in because I know you've got a lot of questions.
Yeah, look, I mean, I know, Simon, your time is really precious, and we've already been talking to you for an hour, so I also have a million questions I want to ask you, but I know we were talking a good bit there about you heading to Chile, but I think we just need to zoom out for a second and remind everybody that you were leading the GGR for about 150 days. Like, your lead was incredible, and when I say incredible, we just couldn't believe your consistency, and I suppose one question that I have for you that I've been thinking about a lot is like your mental game. Like, what was your motivation? Do you you pushed hard and you beat the fleet definitely in consistency, and we've seen that in the GG Underground stats. I don't know if you've looked at that website. There's a GGR Underground. There's a guy who put together all the statistics, and some of the sailing is in 4-hour intervals, and your consistency stacked up in incredible levels throughout the race. But what I wanted to get at was, do you have a mental tactic, or did you have a mantra, or what was your drive to just even Captain Gug said when he came into Les Sables, Don was saying, your boat looks brand new. Don kept saying, your boat looks brand new, and Captain Gug said at one point, look, I took it easy. I can't race every day like Simon, he said, So I'm just wondering, how do you drive yourself like that? Because that's up there with Michael Jordan, with I really think you need to hold yourself up high here and realize what you've done is sensational. And you've been an inspiration for us, honestly.
Yeah, here.
What is your mental game? Do you have a drive that way?
Well, I'm delighted that I've provided some inspiration for people, because, of course, I was inspired by sailors 50 years ago, and that's driven me on. So it'd be nice to repay some of that. Nice to think that I'm repaying some of that. In terms of, it just is in my nature. I mean, I've done a number of, as you mentioned earlier, sort of fast nets and transatlantics and things like that. And that's sort of ingrained into me that if you want to do well in those races, then you need to be on the ball and just up at regular intervals. So I would set alarms when conditions were changing, or when I was expecting a front to come through. I'd set alarms at appropriate times, as typically at hour-long intervals, and get up and just check the sails and then go back to sleep again. It's sort of ingrained into my nature in offshore sailing, and I think to that extent, probably, I mean, apart from Damien Guillou and Tapio, certainly, they're sort of really competitive offshore racers. I mean, if you compare to Kirsten, Abhilash, Pat, who are great sailors who sailed great races, but their nature isn't that, so they don't have that background in racing. I know Abhilash has done some offshore races, but not a huge number in terms of pure racing. So it is just ingrained in there, and I don't feel satisfied. I can't sleep well if I don't think the boat is performing to its maximum.
Like the sail plan is, I'm not a sailor, but everything that I've read and I've spoken to Sean about it, and I've read Mortissier's book, like, and I know you feel your boat, and like the sail plan, there's an art form to it. Do you think it's an obsessive thing? Is it like, or do you just feel it? Like, you definitely have the next level of, is it a sixth sense is what I'm wondering. Like, does Simon Curwen have a thing where he can stand on the boat and go, no, there's something not quite right, and I know exactly what it is. I'm going to cut, I'm going to bring the Geno in a little bit, I'm going to do this. Some people must just have that. Like, how did, like, and also, and the secondary part of that question is, so my first question is, do you think you have a sixth sense for sail plan? And also, my second question is, when you think about the size of Chichester's boat, which was Gypsy Mott, and it was 53 foot, does that make you think, oh my God, how did he do that? Or do you think it would be better if you had a massive boat?
There are a few questions in there. I'm certainly not unique in terms of sixth sense. A lot of sailors would have it, but yes, I mean, I could certainly feel, once you've sailed on a boat, I mean, even if you get on a boat that you don't really know, you can feel if it's not going right, if it's loading up, but the boat's not actually moving any faster. Because the sail's wrong, you need to take a reef, or you need to furl a bit of genoa, or you need to change the headsail. That you can definitely feel. And once you've sailed on a boat, particularly at the end of 250 odd day or 230 odd days, you definitely know your boat very well. And actually, just sail trim, I mean, is so vitally important. You can over trim the sails very easily. If they're out and flapping, something's wrong, you can hear it, you can feel it. But if they're oversheeted, it'll just be going slowly, but it's not so obvious. So just getting those relatively fine adjustments to the sail and setting it up for the Hydra vane, so the Hydra vane's not working too hard and snaking around, and just looking at the position of the Hydra vane rudder. If it's always to one side, that's a good indication that the balance of the boat is wrong. So it's not unique. A lot of sailors will have it, but definitely I can feel when the boat isn't going properly. And I've done a lot of work with sailmaker, the mast supplier, to pick a selection of sails where the real objective of my race was to get the boat up to its hull speed as quickly as possible. So I had some light weather options just to take it up, to get it. So I think in light airs, I was probably one of the fastest boats. I certainly wasn't the fastest boat per se, because there were boats that had higher top speeds than I did, or higher daily runs. The boat isn't naturally fast in a pure sort of Formula One type way, but it is pretty generally good across all wind strengths and across all points of sailing.
I think I went into marine traffic. I during the race, I inputted all the details of your yacht. I don't know if they're still there. I can't remember the exact log speed, but that was in the middle of the race, so hopefully that's still there.
Okay, that'd be really interesting to know. Yeah. So your other question was, bigger boat. So yeah, I mean, you can, as long as the boat is set up right, you can sail much bigger boats. I mean, you only have to look at the Open 60s, the Omokos. As long as they're set up right, and then we can sail them. I mean, one can sail them well. And so Chichester's boat, I mean, I don't think he was particularly happy with the original design and made some modifications while he stopped in Sydney. So bigger boat, he didn't have enough time to really test it before he set out on his challenge. He might have changed a few things. But size in itself is not that important. I think the GGR size is good because it's really the minimum size you'd want to send around the world and through the Southern Ocean. And that makes it as affordable an adventure as it is. And it's also reasonably close to the size of the majority of the boats in the original Golden Globe.
Yeah, sure. I have a million questions, Simon, but I know we've taken up a lot of your time. So I'm just going to ask you one more question, and it is, I know you in 2007, you came first in the two-handed class of the Fastnet race. And my question is, if you had to choose one skipper from the GGR that you just competed in to do a two-handed Fastnet race with you, who would you choose?
Oh, that's slightly unfair. I might pass on that question.
Okay, that's fair enough. Okay, how about what was? Tell us one boat that you were really fond of, someone else's boat.
Okay, I mean, what I will do is I'll say that the two-handed sailing I have done. I've done the vast majority with two people. One is my great mate Paul Peggs, who did the minis back together in 2001. That's where I first met him. And we've done a lot of sailing together. And what you need in a two-handed race is people who complement each other. So we know we sail well together, and his skill set complements my skill set and vice versa.
Yeah.
And the other person I love sailing with two-handed in a racing situation is my daughter Nikki, who I did the prologue race with. And she's also done a mini, and
cool.
is a great sailor. So those are the two people. And we had a fantastic race. If you look back through the records in the Myth of Malham in 2013, which was a race around Eddystone Lighthouse, and that was another one, a bit like the 2007 Fastnet, where in that race there were 600 starters and I think only 60 something finishers. Wow. And so in my class of two-handed, yes, we won it, and we actually did very well in the fully crewed section of that. But there were only two finishers, so winning it wasn't so tricky. But we did finish 17th overall in that Fastnet. Again, and the boats that won it were the big fast boats with sort of 20 crew and whatever. But again, in that Myth of Malham, there weren't a huge number of finishers. But again, it was a classic heavy weather race. Ones that are great to look back on in the memories. Not always so fun to take part in at the time.
Excellent. Look, you've given us great memories in the GGR, Simon, and we just want to say thanks a million. It's an honor to speak to you. Before we finish up, Simon, do you want to tell us a little bit about the business that you run?
Okay. Well, yeah, it's a good little business. I'm not sure that it's a very profitable one, and it doesn't help when the one of the directors and the main person doing all the dog's body work disappears around the world for best part of the year. That's never very good for the continuity of the business. But we just have a river boating business. We've got classic Dutch boats, steel boats on the River Blavet, which is just outside the window here, in southern Brittany, in the Morbihan. And on the Nantes-Brest Canal as well. So that in Brittany there are 600 kilometres of wonderful waterways, and and we have charter boats that you can rent for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or however long you want, and explore Brittany from the water.
And if people want to find you, Simon, what's the website?
That's a relatively easy one. It's brittanyboating.com.
Brilliant. And we'll flash that up on the screen, and we'll stick it into the show description as well.
That's very kind, and we'll get the website up to date and the program up to date fairly shortly. I'm just commissioning all the boats at the moment.
Yeah, look, Simon, it's been amazing to talk to you. Look, I've had a million questions, and we just haven't had the time. We'll have to have a beer with you sometime. We'll have to come to France and see you.
Yeah, a real beer would be best, but a virtual one we could have. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope that your podcast, which is great, I've listened to a few of them, inspires more people to take on challenges, because it's.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. That means the world to us, and congratulations on completing the Golden Globe race and being such a legend by doing it so quickly and racing the whole way and keeping your cool. So it's been inspirational. So it's amazing to talk to you.
Well, thanks for that.
Cheers, Simon.
So thanks a million, Simon.
It's my pleasure.
Everybody for watching.